Oh, wow.
which
Yeah.
speaks, that case speaks directly to our topic at hand today.
Are you able to discuss that case at all?
Yeah, I can talk all about it. I can, he can. Yeah, I was,
Maybe
yeah.
maybe that's a good place to start because it's a
Uh,
real world.
yeah, well, and that case is what uh, I will say ultimately and permanently changed my mind about
Hmm.
a couple of things. So the, both Eric and Chuck are really very, very well aware of that case. Do you just want me to tell people what happened there?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So,
Story time with Doug.
yeah. So at the beginning of this, session, we kind of mentioned that Rule 2 violations and weapon mounted lights, those things are inseparable. Really, one of the biggest concerns was officers using their weapon mounted light as a flashlight. Um, there's even a couple of pictures out there still on the internet of a police officer who's holding up a sticky note, but he's using his weapon mounted light and on trying to illuminate a driver's license so he can read it, on the side of the road. So that kind of stuff was going on. So we've been working on this policy because we were going to be expanding weapon mounted lights from the SWAT team out to patrol. In the meantime, though, there wasn't any kind of real, serious guidelines about, what different units could or could not have on their weapons. And so the individual that was involved in the shooting, it was the other sergeant on the narcotics unit. Quite frankly, he was not well liked or well respected, and that there was a lot of good reasons that many people had those feelings about him. He is a classic example of a guy that did not respond to training. He did not respond to feedback. He did not respond to intense peer counseling. Um, and just as an example, I mean, even in some force on force training scenarios, he had been seen to come into the room with his finger on the trigger. So he had to, not only was there a blatant Rule 2 violations pointing the pistol at people in the room, but he had actually taken the slack out of the trigger. So instructors that were in the room would tell him, "Hey, dude, you had your finger in the trigger." And his response to that was always something along the lines of, "No, I didn't. No, I didn't." And that exact kind of behavior. Now, one thing that was lost in this entire discussion was the fact that the narcotics unit did eventually get that training, but he didn't attend it because he was too busy doing other stuff, and he couldn't be bothered with it because he already knew it all already. Um, and so that was the pistol that he was using the night they went to go do a buy bust operation. Um, and as I stated in the kind of the pre-show part, this buy bust operation took place at the southernmost point of our county. And the reason that they were doing that is because many criminal offenders keep track of where county lines are because they know that they'll be prosecuted differently in one county versus another. And so the guy that were going to buy all this, I don't remember if it was heroin or cocaine. I don't remember now.
It was heroin.
Yeah. Thanks, Chuck. The guy that we're going to buy all this heroin from, he thought he was meeting them in Dallas County. So he was like, "Okay, I'll meet you there." Um, so the guy came walking up, and the official story, or rather the claim was that the sergeant got out of the vehicle. They confronted the suspect. That he was attempting to activate the weapon-mounted light that he had been forced to put onto his pistol and not given any training on. That the department, had very maliciously, made him use a light that he wasn't familiar with. Because I think he'd been using an X200 prior to this, so the X300 is totally different, right? That they actually tried that for a while. So he claimed that he was attempting to operate the light when the weapon fired, and when the weapon fired, a single shot entered the suspect's body, and he died. He died right there. And then the other thing too was that you can't be a prophet in your own hometown. Um, And so everything that we said was suspect, was maybe not even taken seriously. And the other thing too is that the people they had conducting the internal investigation were not very well versed in the use of firearms, and certainly not in grip switches and weapon mounted lights and all that. Yes, and then the internet erupted after that, especially on cop forums or firearms, especially the more serious shooting forums even. And I promise I'm not exaggerating here. We received phone calls from police departments, and I mean federal, state, local, county. I mean game warden districts, stuff like that. I mean, I would sit in my office and the phone would ring, and it would be some guy from greater Chicago area, upset, angry, and he's like wanting to talk to somebody at Plano PD. He's like, "Hey, can tell me what really happened with this, because our chiefs just came in here and took away all of our weapon lights, and they said they're doing it because of this shit that happened in Plano. What just happened there?" Well, so we received phone calls from coast to coast, border to border. I remember some game warden guy from Washington State called up and was fired up, man. He was really upset. So it wasn't just the DG grip switch. That was the evil demon that we all needed to get rid of. But then it was weapon mounted lights, period. There was a lot of people that probably should have known better who went off half-cocked. There were so-called experts that major national news outlets were interviewing, who offered their opinions on weapon mounted lights and DG grip switches, and specifically about what happened in that particular shooting. And they were completely uninformed about the facts of the shooting, especially, of course, the background. And I've only just barely scratched the surface on the background of that shooting, but it was very, very ugly. It was a leadership failure in many, many respects. We don't have time for me to go into all the reasons why that guy was not removed from that unit, even though many people knew that he should have been. The people who made those decisions are now long retired. There was never any accountability at all for the decisions that were made to retain him in that position, even though it was well known that he was effectively rogue and a loose cannon and that he was not safe. So, but that shooting, Chuck is right, that shooting became internet famous, and it's still out there. Every now and then I see a few articles on weapon mounted lights, and they'll actually reference previous news articles on that shooting. Plano PD was not the only police department to have a shooting of that nature, but for whatever reason, at least at the time that it occurred and in the years immediately thereafter, it was certainly probably the most publicized and most famous. And so if you look at just the moment of the shooting itself, forget all of the previous behavior and the poor leadership and the lack of training because he didn't want to attend it, or the training that he didn't respond to. Forget all that for a moment. Ultimately, this was about pointing a gun at a guy that you could see both of his hands, and the guy was not a violent offender. He had never been a violent drug dealer. He did not have a violent criminal history. He was just a slacker who sold heroin. That's all he was. And he didn't show up with a posse. He didn't show up with a team. He just walked up to the buy bust, So, it would have been a lot better to just get out, confront the guy. Okay, if you want to have your pistol drawn, that's fine. You want to have it in the low ready or whatever. Okay, no problem there. But that was a flagrant Rule 2 violation. It was not the first time that the particular sergeant had done that. It probably wasn't even the 10th time that he'd done something like that. And again, knowing what I know about his performance in force-on-force scenarios, there's no doubt in my mind that we know that he had his finger on the trigger at the same time. So it's not just a Rule 2 violation. It's an obvious Rule 3 violation as well. the way I kind of look at that is sort of like, that old formula for fire. What do you have to have fire? You got to have oxygen, you have to have fuel, and you have to have heat. You take away any one of those things and you don't have a fire. You got, if you have a Rule 2 violation and a Rule 3 violation in conjunction with each other, you've got a serious disaster on your hands. And that's, if you'd taken away that Rule 2 violation, well, then maybe we would have just had a negligent discharge into the blacktop, or vice versa. The whole thing was preventable. As some risk managers might say, it was a predictable and preventable event. It was a foreseeable event, probably. But I didn't understand the ideas of foreseeability and all that at that time. I didn't have education in that, but certainly leadership should have. But very, very ugly situation, and it continues. That specific shooting continues to color the debates about weapon-mounted lights and even Rule 2 violations. And yeah, well, Chuck was hired to work on that case.
Well, what you just said about the recipe for fire, what's needed, reminds me of something that Chuck said about what's saving people from being shot isn't finger off the trigger. It's not pointing or something like that. Do you remember that? I thought it was Chuck.
People get under stress and they'll start, like Force Science, several people have talked about, you'll do the trigger affirmation. You get really stressed. You're like, oh, okay, my trigger's still there.
Trigger's still there.
Run away with it, right? And so because of that, something I stole from Claude Warner that obviously goes, far back before Claude, is that muzzle, like Bill Rogers will tell you, muzzle direction is and always has been our primary safety. So your rules for fire, can you everything else? Everything else. And if your muzzle isn't covering another human being, it won't be a tragedy.
Right.
If your muzzle's not, because you think about that, like have we seen bona fide mechanical failures of firearms where the gun goes off? You have a cook-off, you have whatever the case may be. It's rare, but it happens. So the one safety that we have, this is not your safety. It's imperfect at best. Task confusion is a thing, which I'm pretty sure happened in a case and I've seen others. The most recent one that was just a few days ago, where they had the guy hiding behind the door. That happened in Louisville, Kentucky, with the female officer, where she's trying to light up. It's a homeless guy hiding in a vacant house, and you see her body cam. She panics. She tries to put the light on him. She yells, "Show me your hands." You hear pow, and then you hear her go. She's trying to activate the light with her trigger finger. But all of these are predicated upon the muzzle has to be covering another human being for it to be a tragedy, period. End of discussion. It has to be. You can screw up everything else. And that's the easiest one to not screw up if you are mindful of this. Whereas trigger fingers will start to get sneaky, things like that. As far as the case that Doug was talking about, one of the things I note is on his department, muzzling a human being was a reportable use of force. Mm-hmm. A reportable use of force. Right. But that unit was not reporting it, and they were ignoring that rule. They were consistently muzzling people with that's how we do things here. Narcotic enforcement is dangerous, yada, yada, yada. So they had this blasé cowboy attitude towards muzzling people willy-nilly. The other thing is, I dug into their training, I dug into their SOPs, everything else. All of that was solid. The training was solid. The policy was solid. So not only was this guy violating Rule 2, never let your muzzle cover anything you're not willing to kill or destroy. Using your muzzle as a use of force should be something that just before you are about to shoot a known threat. We had a guy that was kind of known to not really be a threat, and you could see his hands in this case. So there was no bona fide reason to muzzle this cat, except that's how we do things in this unit. So that's how the guy did it.